The storm had been brewing since dusk, rolling dark clouds swallowing the horizon, the kind that carried both thunder and secrets. By the time it broke over Red Hollow, the wind was shrieking through the old wooden buildings like a ghost that couldn't find rest. The rain came in cold sheets, hammering on roofs, flooding the dusty streets, driving every living soul indoors. Inside the Silver Spur Inn, a small fire crackled in the stone hearth. The air smelled of smoke and wet leather, the murmur of a few travelers filling the dim light. Clara Whitmore sat in the corner near the fire, hands wrapped around a chipped teacup that had long gone cold. Her dark brown hair was damp at the edges, and her blue dress, plain but neat, had been patched too many times to count. She'd been a widow for almost a year. The bank still wanted the last of her husband's debts paid, and the townsfolk whispered that the Whitmore farm would soon be auctioned off. But tonight, she still had a sliver of hope. The local banker, Mr. Harlan, was hosting a dinner for respectable townspeople. Clara had managed an invitation, one last chance to appeal for more time. Only problem was, respectable widows didn't go to dinners alone. She needed a husband. Just for a night. A name to shield her from gossip, a presence to make the banker listen. But where would she find someone willing to play along? As thunder cracked outside, the inn's door burst open, carried on a gust of wind and rain. Every head turned. A man stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, the storm at his back. His hat was soaked, a dark Stetson dripping rain onto the wooden floor. His coat was worn but fine, real leather, not the kind most farmhands wore. He carried himself like someone used to hard work and long rides, and maybe command. He glanced around, shaking the rain from his hat before his eyes, gray, sharp as silver, met hers. Clara froze. Something about him pulled the air straight from her lungs. He moved toward the fire, ordered whiskey in a quiet, low voice, then stood beside her table, warming his hands. For a moment, neither spoke. Rough night for traveling, she managed finally. Could say that, he replied without looking at her. His voice had that deep, steady drawl that made even plain words sound like promises. Roads are near flooded past Miller's Creek. You came from the west, then? She asked. He nodded once. Was headed through, looking for a place to stable my horse and dry off. Something in Clara, desperation, courage, madness, rose all at once. Before she could talk herself out of it, she said, "Sir, forgive me for asking something strange." He looked at her then. "I've heard stranger." She swallowed hard. "Could you pretend to be my husband? Just for tonight?" The words hung between them like lightning about to strike. The man blinked, surprised, but there was no laughter, no mockery. Just a slow raise of one eyebrow, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "That's not the usual sort of favor I get asked," he said finally, voice calm, almost amused. "I wouldn't ask if I weren't desperate," she said quickly, cheeks burning. "There's a dinner tonight. The banker who holds my debts will be there. If I show up alone, he'll think I've no protection left, no respect. I just need someone to stand beside me, that's all. I can pay you for your time." He set his glass down. "Don't want your money," he said simply. Then, after a pause, "What's your name, ma'am?" "Clara. Clara Whitmore." He nodded slowly, studying her face as if measuring the truth in her eyes. "All right, Mrs. Whitmore," he said at last. "For tonight, I'll be your husband." Her heart skipped. "Truly?" He gave a faint smile. "You've got my word." That evening, the storm eased just enough for the town to gather at the Harlan house, a grand building lit with lanterns that gleamed on wet cobblestones. Clara arrived on the stranger's arm, her pulse racing. He had introduced himself simply as Luke, offering no last name. But once inside, he moved through the room with quiet authority, shoulders straight, chin lifted, as if he owned the place. When Mr. Harlan approached, his smug expression faltered at the sight of Luke. "Mrs. Whitmore, I didn't expect you'd bring company." Luke's tone was easy, but his words cut clean. A husband doesn't let his wife face business alone. The banker flushed and stammered something about hospitality. Throughout dinner, Luke's confidence wrapped around Clara like a warm coat. Every glance he gave her, every small touch at her elbow, made her feel protected, seen, important again. When someone mocked her quaint farm, Luke leaned forward, voice smooth as thunder. "That quaint farm feeds half your town," he said. "My wife's land's worth more than most men's pride." No one dared laugh after that. As the evening drew to a close, Luke helped her with her shawl, his hand brushing hers. "You did well tonight," he said softly. She looked up at him, her eyes shining. "We did well." He smiled faintly. "Suppose we did." Outside, the rain had gentled to a whisper. He offered her his arm again, and together they walked through the puddles, the lamps reflecting gold in the water. For the first time in a long time, Clara felt something stir in her chest that wasn't fear or sorrow. It was hope. And she didn't even know his real name. The morning came soft and golden, the kind of dawn that makes the wet earth steam and the fields shimmer like glass. The storm had passed, leaving behind the faint scent of sage and rain. Birds were calling again, timidly at first, as though testing if the world was safe. Clara Whitmore stood by the window of her small farmhouse, still wearing last night's borrowed warmth. The memory of his steady hand at her back, his quiet confidence that had turned the banker's mockery into silence. She hadn't slept much. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him. Luke, the stranger who had walked in from the storm and somehow made her feel like she mattered again. Now he was leaving. She saw him from the window, out by the old hitching post, tightening the reins on his horse, the morning light glinting on his dark hair. His hat hung low over his eyes, and for a moment, he looked like he belonged to some other world entirely, one she'd never reach. Clara stepped outside, her boots crunching on the damp gravel. "You're going already?" she asked, breath misting in the cool air. He turned, giving her that same faint smile. "I've been in one place long enough," he said. "Got miles to cover." "You didn't even stay for breakfast." "Didn't want to impose." She laughed softly. "You saved my reputation last night. I think that earns you at least a biscuit." He chuckled then. A low, warm sound that settled somewhere deep in her chest. Maybe another time. But she could see it in his eyes. He wasn't used to another time. Men like him kept moving, never staying long enough to let roots grow. Still, she couldn't let him leave without knowing what he'd done for her. "Luke," Mr. Harlan changed his tone completely after dinner. "Said he'd extend my payments another 6 months. You gave me that. I don't know how to thank you." He shrugged lightly, brushing rain from his coat. "You already did. Seeing you stand tall in there, didn't need me half as much as you thought." "That's not true," she said quickly. "If you hadn't, maybe," he interrupted gently. "But I reckon you'd have found a way." The wind carried silence between them, soft and lingering. Then Clara said, "You never told me your last name." He hesitated. "Luke'll do." She folded her arms. "That's not fair. You know mine." He glanced toward the horizon, then back at her. "Some names carry too much weight, Mrs. Whitmore." Her heart fluttered strangely at that. "You can call me Clara," she said. For the first time, he met her gaze fully. The distance he carried in his eyes, the weary look of a man used to being alone, seemed to ease. "Clara," he repeated, quiet, as if he were trying it on his tongue. When he finally climbed into the saddle, she stepped closer. "If you're ever back this way, the farm could use another pair of hands," she said. He tipped his hat. "Careful, ma'am. Sounds like you're offering a job to your husband." The tease made her blush, but before she could reply, he clicked his reins and started down the muddy trail. The horse's hooves splashed through puddles, the sound growing fainter until he vanished over the ridge. For a moment, Clara just stood there, arms crossed against the breeze, feeling the emptiness he left behind. Then something caught her eye, an envelope tucked under the porch lantern. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. The paper was thick, expensive, and embossed at the top with a seal. L. Granger, owner, Silver Creek Ranch. She gasped softly, rereading the words. Silver Creek Ranch wasn't just any spread, it was the largest in 3 states. The Granger name carried power, wealth, and reputation. He wasn't just a traveler. He was the Luke Granger. The man who'd sat beside her, pretending to be her husband, could buy and sell half the county with a single handshake. Clara sank onto the porch step, the letter trembling in her hands. There was no note inside, just his name and a post address scrawled at the bottom. But that alone said everything. He hadn't vanished. He'd left her a door. Days passed. The fields dried, the sun came back strong, and with it, whispers spread through town. Folks talked about the mysterious man who'd stood up for the widow Whitmore at Harlan's dinner, who'd made the banker back down with nothing more than a look. Some said he was a lawman. Others said a ranch hand. No one guessed the truth. Clara kept the letter tucked safely in her drawer, but she read it every night, tracing the edges until it felt worn and familiar. She told herself it meant nothing, just a kindness remembered, but her heart didn't believe it. Then, one afternoon, a wagon rolled up her drive. Dust swirled behind the wheels, and her heart leapt before she even saw the rider. But it wasn't Luke. It was a young man with a letter in his hand and a horse branded with the Silver Creek insignia. "Mrs. Whitmore?" he asked, tipping his hat. "Mr. Granger sent me. Said you might be needin' some help with your fences, and some seed for spring." Clara blinked, unable to speak. The man smiled. "He said to tell you this, ma'am, consider it an investment in hope." Her throat tightened, her heart pounding with something too large for words. She turned toward the fields, toward the far-off ridge where he'd ridden away days ago, and whispered, almost to herself, "Maybe you're not so far away after all, Luke Granger." The wind carried her words across the open land, through the waving grass and toward the horizon where the sky met the earth. A promise, perhaps, that someday he'd come back. And when he did, she wouldn't ask him to pretend anymore. This time, she'd ask him to stay.